Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, November 12th around here, and we got a lot to get to. We're going to start with a little bit of reaction from those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. Texas and Miami find their way into the CFP, as well as South Florida with Memphis's loss last week. We'll get into that. We'll talk about how I disagree with some of the rankings, but overall, I think they're doing a relatively good job right about now, taking into account the eye test that I think is really tough to put a finger on, but is important when you're trying to figure out the CFP field. We'll get into that first, and then we'll talk about all the ranked matchups. We got four massive ones. Notre Dame at Pittsburgh, that had an interesting quote from Pat Narduzzi that can inspire a ton of confidence around Panthers fans. You got Iowa USC, a huge one to keep USC's CFP hopes alive. Oklahoma-Alabama, very interesting one. We'll talk about how that one could be very close. And then Texas at Georgia, probably the main event of the weekend, the one that a lot of people are going to be watching very closely. Then we got upset alerts all over the place, especially in the Big 12 this upcoming weekend. A number of teams that could go down and totally change the complexion of that conference. And then we'll just do a little bit of a whip around some huge games over in the American this week. Another huge one in the ACC between Virginia and Duke. We'll give you a little bit of a peek at the Battle of the Ravine, incredible game over there in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, that is unlike anything else and is exactly what college football is all about. We'll get to that at the very end, but for right now, we got to talk about the CFP rankings, and we won't waste too much time on this. Obviously, this thing will continue to develop. I think this weekend we'll see a big-time shift in these rankings because of all the big-time matchups that are going on and the upsets that could possibly come from those. But let's go ahead and jump into this. The top 25, as it sits today, top 5 is the exact same. You go Ohio State, Indiana, A&M, Alabama, and Georgia. No change from last week. I don't really think there should have been. I'll release my top 25 likely later tonight, maybe even on Thursday, and I might have one tweak there, but overall, really like this top 5. I think those teams have fully earned to be there. Texas Tech sits at number 6. I believe they're sitting at number 8 or 7 in the AP poll, so a little bit of a change there. Ole Miss and Oregon follow them. Notre Dame kicks up one spot because BYU fell. Texas and Oklahoma, the exact same thing. And then you get into kind of an interesting spot where you have BYU at 12. They fall a couple of spots after that Texas Tech loss. That's a battle back and forth. I understand people that think they shouldn't have fallen as far as they did. I also understand that right when you get into that kind of world between 7 to 13, 7 to 12, it's pretty compact. So if you are going to fall, it's not overly surprising to me how far BYU fell. They sit right above the team they beat, Utah, a couple of weeks ago, and that's a really interesting team. As an at-large team, possibly, if BYU were to lose to Cincinnati and then Cincinnati loses to Texas Tech, maybe Utah has a little bit of an opening there to back their way into this thing. Could get very complicated, and we'll talk about that on Friday, get into the chaos scenarios of every conference. You got Vanderbilt sitting there at 14, bumped up a couple of spots. This is the big one. Miami jumps over Georgia Tech, jumps up a couple of spots. I tend to believe they were kind of righting a wrong that they did last week, and they didn't fully do it. Obviously, a lot of people were mad about Notre Dame being over Miami. I wasn't nearly as mad as a lot of other people were, so I'll allow those people to be upset. But at the end of the day, I think they bumped them up. I think they made them the top ACC team because they understood that they probably put them a little bit too low last week. And the win over Notre Dame is huge. The win over Notre Dame definitely is propping this team up as we get deeper and deeper into the season. The reality is they can be the highest ranked ACC team right now. They could win out and still not make the conference championship. So maybe there's a world for an at-large bid there. That's something to watch, whether Vanderbilt loses or Oklahoma loses. Maybe Texas falls as well, and then you can kind of find your way into that mix. Maybe Miami could do that, and we'll talk about that on Friday with the chaos scenario that could very well go down in the ACC. But I understand this ranking. I tend to believe I would have Georgia Tech at 15 and Miami at 16, but overall, I kind of understand where people are at. I think a lot of people are really upset about Georgia Tech's ranking in this poll and upset that they didn't move up further. Obviously, with the bye week, didn't have too much work to be done, but at the end of the day, I've watched every snap of Georgia Tech football this week. Long story, I grew up a Georgia Tech fan. My grandfather took me to games there where I kind of fell in love with college football with the Paul Johnson triple option. But at the end of the day, I've watched every single snap of this football team this year. they're right around 15 or 16. Now, there is something that was said on the show that I am very, very worried about, and just going forward worried about, not necessarily in this scenario, but they were talking about it, and I believe it was Heather Dinich that was talking about this, and she brought up the Wake Forest game for Georgia Tech earlier in the season. We've talked about it on here. Georgia Tech should have lost that game. There was a play where they didn't call offsides that was very obviously offsides, and Georgia Tech's able to get the ball back, go kick a game-winning field goal. Technically, they are right. Technically, Heather Dinich is right that Wake Forest hypothetically should have won that game. That one blown call did kind of dictate the outcome of that football game. We can't go relitigate games. It's a very, very dangerous path to go down. If we are starting to say, well, Auburn got a little bit hurt against Georgia, or they got really hurt against Oklahoma, should we drop Oklahoma 5 spots because they technically should have another loss? It's a dangerous way to go about business. So I really hope that is not something that really comes into conversation deeper in the season, because Georgia Tech has one loss. I understand that hypothetically they should have 2. They have 1 loss. So we have to treat them like a 1-loss team. I'm worried they're kind of treating them as a 2-loss team, even though there's only a 1 in their loss column because of that Wake Forest game. You can talk about them differently because of that. You can debate how good of a team they are in terms of an at-large spot because of that. If we're talking about it in terms of just ranking them right next to Miami or a little bit higher, if they, let's say they ended up beating Wake Forest without that call happening. If Wake Forest fumbles the ball and Georgia Tech goes down and kicks a field goal, are they sitting at 14 right now? Are they any higher, or are they sitting where they are right now? I just don't want that to become a part of the conversation, because then you're relitigating games that might be a little bit less cut and dry than that Georgia Tech Wake Forest game, and that one's not even fully cut and dry. So that's just a dangerous thing I want people to avoid. Georgia Tech, if you win out, you're in the ACC Championship. You'll have a shot to go to the CFP. So overall, the Miami-Georgia Tech rankings don't have a ton to do with what's going to go on the rest of the way. It could impact Miami being an at-large team, but frankly, I see Miami falling one more time before the end of the year. But we'll talk about that as the season goes on. USC slots in at 17. I think it makes total sense there. Michigan right behind them. Although they do have that head-to-head win, right? Yes, I believe so, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember, and now I'm going back and forth. But Virginia here at 19 after they lose. Louisville goes down with them. They kind of just go down in unison, both 5 spots. Makes sense to me, if I'm being totally honest. I think Virginia especially was a team that was relatively holding on by a thread, so when they did lose, they were going to fall quite a ways. They can still work their way back into this, get into the ACC Championship, and get into the dance, but obviously was going to be a team that fell quite a bit. Kind of the same thing with BYU as well. You have Iowa at 21 after the loss to Oregon. I don't see why you would punish them, and they didn't much here. They just dropped them 1 spot. I think that makes total sense. You got Pitt at 22, sets up a huge one against Notre Dame this weekend. We'll talk about that one in the next segment, a huge one that maybe Pitt can get back into this conversation after a very weird start to their season, including a quarterback change. Tennessee at 23, the team that just has 3 really, really tough losses where they played good football, but they also played some really good football teams. So not overly surprising where they're sitting. I go back and forth on Tennessee. I might have them ranked later. I might not. I'm going back and forth on the bottom of this bracket, but at the end of the day, Tennessee in there at 23. South Florida makes their introduction into the CFP poll at 24, and then Cincinnati at 25 rounds things out. A very good team with a huge one against BYU coming up, I believe, next week, if I'm not mistaken. So overall, a good ranking. I really don't have a huge problem with this. A couple of things when they were talking about the idea or the ideology of the way they went about it that perked my ears, at the very least, made me a little bit nervous about how they're going about this. Don't love if they're relitigating the Georgia Tech Wake Forest game. Which other games are they relitigating? Are they saying, well, Ohio State, yeah, they played a 7-point game against Texas, but they could have won that game by 30. You just don't want to get lost in those as much as some people maybe would in that room. I don't think it'll have a huge impact on the end of the year, kind of the way this looks, because I think we all understand that if Georgia Tech's getting in, it's with one of those auto bids, but just didn't love that approach. If that's what's happening in that room, we'll see how that kind of develops over the next little bit. Miami's got to be relatively happy, because not only do you have a path to possibly get back into the ACC Championship with a little bit of help in front of you, but you might be able to make this thing with an at-large bid if you get enough chaos in front of you. I still think you need quite a bit, but who knows? Maybe you can get a little bit and make something happen. In terms of the bracket, this is the way it looks. Ohio State, Indiana, Alabama, or Texas A&M and Alabama are your top three or top four teams. Those are the teams getting the byes. That's the way it was last week. No change there. So that's all same. The two differences, or the three differences, I should say, is Ole Miss at 7, Texas at 10. That's going to be that would hypothetically be one of the matchups. Oregon, Notre Dame would be the 8-9 matchup, a great one. I would absolutely love that one. Georgia would host USF in this scenario at the 5-12, and they would go on to play. The winner of that would go on to play Alabama, and then you have Texas Tech, Miami in the 6-11 spot. The winner of that one set to play Texas A&M in the second round. So overall, a really fun bracket. I think there's no argument that a lot of people would love to see Lane Kiffin against Steve Sarkisian, or Marcus Freeman against Dan Lanning, or the new Texas Tech team against the juggernaut, quote unquote, the hypothetical juggernaut, I guess might be the best way to put Miami from the ACC. It would be really, really fun to watch all of that unfold. And then if you get Texas Tech going to, or not going to College Station, but Texas Tech against A&M in that second round would be downright special. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, I think the big thing to take away from this one is there's 5 SEC teams in here. That is a big deal, and it's a massive deal if Notre Dame goes down to Pitt this weekend, because then they're out of this thing, and then you might slot another one in there. Actually, you would. It would be Oklahoma that would slot into this other slot, and then you'd have Texas at the 9 seed, Oklahoma at the 10 seed, and you have 6 teams. Now, I tend to believe there will only be at most 5 SEC teams in this thing. I still think there's a ton of paths for them to only be able to get 4. Let's say USC is able to get into this thing with a massive win over Oregon, but a 10-2 Oregon would then be kind of on the bubble with possibly a 10-2 Texas or a 9-3 Texas. All of this will kind of work itself out over the next little bit. We'll figure out, Texas and Georgia. If Texas wins that game, maybe they just flip positions in this thing and nothing really changes in the overall structure of this playoff. If Notre Dame loses, it throws a total wrench into this thing. And then Oregon, if they lose a couple of games down the stretch, if USC falls, if a lot of chaos happens in the Big Ten, maybe it's just Ohio State and Indiana at the end of this thing. Maybe 2 bids come from the Big 12. Maybe the SEC gets 5 or 6. It could get wild, I guess is the best way to put it. What it does show me, a couple of just grandiose takeaways. The SEC is going to get at least 4 teams. I think it's getting more and more likely that they get 5, because I think when you look at the chaos scenarios that we'll go over on Friday, you could have a lot of 10-2 teams right there. And last year, you had the benefit of saying an SMU team, let's say, that was 11-2 coming out of that ACC championship. They could point around and say, well, these guys are 9-3. They lost 3 games throughout their schedule. They do not deserve to be in the CFP. If it's a bunch of 10-2 teams sitting there, like a Vanderbilt that's 10-2 or an Oklahoma, you might be in a little bit of trouble. So that's something to watch as we head forward. I think it's fair to say the SEC is getting at least 4 teams. I'd probably bet on 5 teams right this moment. The Big Ten, it really comes down to USC or Michigan. Can Michigan beat Ohio State at the end of the year and sneak into this thing? Can USC beat Oregon and then Oregon stay in the dance? It's going to get complicated, I think is the best way to put it. The ACC and the Big 12, I suppose, could still get 2, but I'm finding it much, much more less likely as we move forward. And then you got Notre Dame, and that's obviously going to be a team that could totally shake this thing up. The Group of 5 spot is going to be the Group of 5 spot. I won't waste too much time on that. I've said before, I think a Group of 5 playoff would be a great idea. I understand I'm one of the quote-unquote sickos that would absolutely watch that, and not everyone would. So I get the pros, I get the cons. But at the end of the day, South Florida is a great team, and they are more than deserving to at least get a shot to play in the CFP. They would have a tough battle if they had to go to Athens in that first weekend. But it's going to be really, really awesome to watch all of this set up. It sounds like there is going to be a whole lot of SEC and Big Ten. I don't think I had to tell people that. I think people should have known that coming into the season. But that's the way this thing is going to roll out. We will see how it all ends. Maybe Miami's an at-large bid, but the ACC champion doesn't get in. All of this stuff is on the table. We'll talk about it more on Friday, but right now, a really fun bracket. Would love to see Texas Tech, Texas A&M. Would love to see Lane Kiffin against Steve Sarkisian. Would be a lot of really fun interviews going up to that one. But at the end of the day, a really interesting rankings. I don't know how much it told us. The Miami little debacle or wrinkle in this thing makes it a little bit more confusing, but I think overall we'll find out a lot this weekend. A lot of teams will win, a lot of teams will lose. Maybe Virginia goes down again, and we have a little bit more open of an ACC. it's going to get interesting. And we will break this down pretty much every week. We'll go through the rankings, we'll go through the bracket and see just where everything sits. I tend to believe we're going to have a new couple of teams in the bracket just about every week moving forward. So we'll talk about it all as it unfolds. Let's take a break, and then we got to get into some games. Some massive games this upcoming weekend. We got 4 ranked matchups, and we got to talk about them all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the CFP poll that came out this yesterday. Seems like Miami over Georgia Tech is the big thing that everyone's pretty upset about. I'm not super upset about it, mainly because it's probably going to work itself out throughout the ACC schedule with Miami just not even controlling their own destiny in that conference. So that'll be interesting to watch. Maybe Miami has an at-large bid. All of this stuff we will talk about on Friday, I promise you that. But we got some ranked games to talk about. We got 4 big-time ranked games this upcoming weekend that could totally shake up the playoff, could totally shake up what conferences look like, could knock a number of teams out of the playoff race. And let's go ahead and jump into this. And we'll start with the one that, weirdly enough, doesn't matter to Pat Narduzzi, apparently. That was a very, very weird comment he made yesterday or 2 days ago when he was asked about this game being a must-win. Said absolutely not, and kind of left it there. Didn't necessarily expand, didn't save himself in some respects. He doesn't believe this is a must-win. It's going to make it really tough for me to pick Pitt here, but at the end of the day, very interesting game. And Mason Heinschel, if you haven't watched the kid, incredible. It's incredible what he's been able to do since coming in for Eli Holstein, which coming into the season, I was sitting here telling you that's one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. I truly believe that, and things fell apart pretty quickly. They lose the game to West Virginia early in the season. They make the switch in quarterback, and they sling the ball around the field. That is what this team does. That is what they're defined by. With Desmond Reed being such a good receiving back, you have the ability to kind of play around with a lot of different ways, a lot of different personnel groupings, and then let number 0 be who he is, which is a downright special playmaker. So we'll see what happens in that. Ja'Kyron Turner is another incredible player, a really, really good running back for them. This team is going to throw the ball around the field. Notre Dame secondary is really tough. Now, they have had bad moments this year, especially early on in the year, but Leonard Moore is one of the best, maybe the best coverage corner in the entire country. Christian Gray is finally finding a groove after a slow start, maybe switching numbers threw him off a little bit, but he is rolling now in that new number 6. A lot of really, really good players back there, and a lot of guys that just know exactly where they need to be against a really young quarterback that isn't the best recipe for success. But at the end of the day, there is an interesting element here. Pitt's top 5 in the country in rush yards allowed. They have the ability, as much as anyone has the ability, because I'm not sure how many teams actually do have the ability to take him fully out of the game, but they can do enough against Jeremiah Love. Now, Ty Edwards for West Virginia had a great game earlier in the year. They've been much better against the run since then. There's a bigger challenge. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price is, for my money, the best running back duo in the country, and probably one of the best we've seen in quite some time around college football. Is an elite duo that can do so much damage. Maybe Pitt can just limit that. It's one of those players, it's one of those duos that you're not going to totally shut down. That's just not in the cards for any team. They're too dynamic, they're too physical, they're too fast. It's not going to work. What you can do is limit their impact, and then you got to get after the young quarterback. CJ Carr is incredible. He has played really, really high-level football really all year. I mean, that first half of that Miami game was shaky, but then he kind of found a groove. In that A&M game, he played good football. He's a really, really talented kid, playing really high-level football right now, and he will have openings. This is not a good pass defense for Pitt right now. This is a defense that has really, really struggled to stop some of those big plays. I think he's going to have a moment here. He's on the road against a ranked team. Maybe not as much juice as he thought, considering what Pat Narduzzi said, but at the end of the day, there will be big plays to be made. They're going to absolutely sell out to make sure that number 4 and number 24, Jadarian Price, I believe, number 24 do not take over this game, because they absolutely can. That means it's CJ Carr's chance to take over a game, and I think he can do that. I really, really like what Pitt is doing this year. I think they're doing some incredible things. I think it's a little bit more fragile than some people think. I think that defense is kind of holding on for dear life, and that offense is bailing them out quite a bit. I don't think it's going to work in this game. I think you're going after the wrong group of DBs in this one. I think Leonard Moore makes a couple of big plays. I think Notre Dame kind of rolls here. 31-20 is what I'll pick. I think Pitt might score a late touchdown to make it look a little bit better. I just really think Notre Dame is rolling right now. I think their pass defense for Pitt is really going to struggle. And I just think the two running backs are too big of a difference maker to fully take out of this game. I'll take Notre Dame to win and essentially punch their ticket. I believe they have Stanford and Syracuse, if I'm not mistaken, at the rest of the year. If those are the two, then you've pretty much punched your ticket, at least as an at-large team, into the CFP. Number 21, Iowa at number 17, USC. USC favored by 6.5 in this one, over-under at 58.5. This is a really interesting one because Iowa comes off that loss to Oregon where I don't know about you guys. I came out of it feeling better about what Iowa was and what Iowa was going to be going forward because obviously they lost a game that they're very comfortable in. They lost a game to a very physical, very intense team. That being said, this Iowa team just a little bit different than some of the past teams. And maybe it is Mark Gronowski just being that big of a difference maker, being kind of a winner as they call it, and being able to make plays when it really, really matters. The big thing here to keep in mind is we just saw what Iowa was capable of doing against a team that is more talented than them, but the weather helped them out quite a bit. The weather's going to help them out in this one. This is going to be Iowa weather. Now, it'll be a little bit warmer, so that'll be a little bit nicer, but at the end of the day, it is going to be raining during this game. It sounds like it's going to be a very soggy weekend around LA. That could lean towards Iowa. Now, that's not to say USC can't run the football. They've done a great job with that. King Miller has taken over for Waymon Jordan since he went down. Don't know what the status is on him. At the end of the day, I think it is very likely to be King Miller in this football game. They got to find a way to run the football because it is going to be really, really tough to throw the football on this football team, even if it was perfect weather. They allow 148 yards per game through the air. You're just going to have to find a way to run the football. And it's going to be gross. It's going to be gutty. It's going to be the game that Lincoln Riley has had to prove people wrong. He's probably had 5 or 6 different chances to show people that this is a different team from a level of physicality, from mental toughness, from physical toughness, from just being able to impose your will the way a Big Ten championship level team does. He hasn't been able to do it. There's been a number of moments like this. Notre Dame was one of those moments, and I thought the Michigan win was incredible. It was a massive one. Now that I think about it, yeah, USC did beat Michigan. I got lost last segment, but apologies for that. The win over Michigan, massive. It's absolutely one that you needed. This Michigan team isn't quite the ones of the past, so you're going to have to be able to prove it again. And this one, it's going to have to be a little bit grosser. It's going to have to be a little bit muddier. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be tough. Now, for Iowa, USC does well against the run. There's no doubt about that. Still a group that can be attacked, especially if you lean on them enough. You can get Kamari Moulton going and make this thing really, really interesting in a hurry. This is one of those that USC is looking at this game, and they're saying this is the one that propels us into the CFP conversation. We get a massive one against Oregon next week, and then we can totally take the roof off this thing, maybe take Oregon's spot in the CFP at the very least, get into the CFP, and then who knows what happens the rest of the way. I think they're going to fall on their face. I really do, and I don't really have a strong feeling for why. I think this is the moment where USC gets really amped up for a game. They get really excited. They think it's the moment to really assert themselves as a Big Ten power, and Iowa comes in and kind of punches them in the mouth. Now, Iowa doesn't play great on the road. I don't know. It just takes one moment. I'll be honest, I don't have a ton to go on here. I don't have a ton that is pushing me one way or the other. I think Oregon barely got it done in an Iowa-type football game. I don't think USC is quite there yet. I think it's going to be a physical, fun game. I think USC is going to prove at the very least that they're not as soft as they were. I think this is a different challenge. And I think Kirk Ferentz knows that, and I think he's going to impose their will, and I think they're going to win this one. I'll say 27-24. I think they get points on both sides of the ball, but I think Iowa makes enough plays in between the tackles to win this one. Number 11, Oklahoma at number 4, Alabama. Alabama favored by 6.5 in this one, over-under at 45.5, as you can imagine with these two defenses, but this is a great one. This is one that's going to be absolutely incredible. A lot of people buried Oklahoma after that Texas loss. I think with John Mateer being injured, I think it's fair to say that one, obviously, you don't want to throw that result out the window, but this Oklahoma team's a whole lot better than the one that you saw in Red River. And now they get a huge opportunity because you look forward at the next two games that they play against Missouri and LSU. those are a whole lot easier than they looked a couple of weeks ago, or especially early in the season. So you're in a position now, if you're Oklahoma, you go on the road, you get this big time win, everything is back on the table. You could jump over Texas, who could lose to Georgia, and we'll talk about that one in a second, obviously. But Alabama walks into one needing a win, because I really do think Alabama's one of those teams that, let's say the chaos scenario really does hit the SEC, and you have tons of 10-2 teams, you have a couple of 11-1 teams with A&M and Ole Miss possibly. That FSU loss could come back to haunt them. I think they've done plenty to erase that one, to make that one kind of a weird blip in an otherwise incredible run. That being said, you lose one more, then that becomes a bigger data point. The same way a Florida loss for Texas would become a massive data point if they lost another one. I think it's a pretty big data point right now, obviously. So I think it's going to be, they're going to be in a position where you have to win this one. Not necessarily to say if you lose it, you're absolutely out of the CFP. I think there's a number of ways they could still get in, even losing this game. It's just to say it makes it a lot more complicated, and there's a lot of teams that'd be more than happy to be the team that knocked Alabama out, even in a 10-2 season. Stuff like that is on the table, as crazy as that sounds. But the question to me has been the same one as it's been every single Alabama game this year, really. Can Ty Simpson make spectacular plays? They're not going to be able to run the football. Plain and simple. This Oklahoma defense is too good. Brent Venables will have these guys really ready. They're not going to be able to run the football. Can Ty Simpson do enough? And the offensive line, can they protect enough? Because this is a very good front for Oklahoma. I mean, when you look back at that Texas game that they lost, Texas got the ball out of Arch Manning's hands as fast as they possibly could, because that is a terrifying front, and if they were going to get after him, it's going to be a really long afternoon. Now, Ty Simpson, more than capable of executing at a very high level. It's going to be tough, and he's going to have to make a number of plays just kind of on his own in some respects, and a lot of things are still not working around him. He is making quite a few plays. He's going to have to do it in this football game as well. For Oklahoma, it's the entire opposite side. I don't think you're going to throw the ball to a victory here. I think John Mateer's arm is dangerous. I think he can make some big-time plays. I also think when you have Bray Hubbard back there, you do not want that guy sailing balls, and he is one to sail at least one or two per game. So that's the reality. You got to get the run game going. You got to get Torrey Blaylock. You got to get Xavier Robertson. You got to get John Mateer. Obviously, I believe had 80 yards in their last game. Very comprehensive run game that they have. Can their offensive line handle this challenge? Because it's a very real challenge up front. Maybe not quite as stiff as some of the other ones you face, like against Texas, but you got stonewalled against Texas. So a lot of things to figure out. Bama is fourth in the country in turnover margin per game. You got to make sure that this game does not have to be on John Mateer's arm, because he will make a mistake or two, and that will totally change the complexion of this one, especially because you're inside Brian Denny. So need a top-notch performance from that Oklahoma offensive line. If they allow Yonze Pierre to take over this game, he's going to have like 3 sacks, and it's going to be a really long afternoon for John Mateer. That is how good this group is. That's how good that kid in particular is, Yonze Pierre. But Xavier Robertson is probably the most important player in this game for Oklahoma, if I had to imagine. And then you just got to be able to guard these guys on the outside for Alabama. There's a number of ways that Oklahoma can go into Tuscaloosa and get the job done. It's a very good defense. It's a dangerous offense with a quarterback that is pretty cool, calm, and collected in these moments. Obviously, the Texas game was different. He was injured. I'm not holding that against him too aggressively. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to one of these quarterbacks making one big-time throw. I don't think I would trust anyone in the country right now with that in that race, I suppose, than Ty Simpson. I think Ty Simpson has been the most clutch quarterback in the entire country. I think he will be in this game. I think Alabama wins this one 30-20. I think it's very close late in this one. I think Alabama gets a late touchdown or a late field goal to push it to 2 possessions, and then John Mateer throws a pick to finish this game. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I think Oklahoma has a great chance. Well, I don't want to say great chance. Has a very solid chance to win this game. I just think Alabama's playing at a different level right now, and I think Ty Simpson is a guy that can make all types of plays in not ideal situations. And then the main event, at least what a lot of people would consider the main event. Maybe some people, Oklahoma, Alabama leans that way, but number 10 Texas on the road in Athens, number 5 Georgia waiting for them. 6.5-point favorites is Georgia, over under at 48.5, a 7:30 kickoff in Sanford Stadium. I've been in one or two of those. it gets crazy. I can promise you that. It's not the loudest stadium in the world. When you get there at night, ooh, buddy, it gets crazy in a hurry. But it is going to be incredible. A rematch of the SEC title a year ago. Obviously, Georgia gets the 2 wins over Texas a year ago. 2 of the 3 wins that Texas had a year ago were at the hands of Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, and they manhandled Texas. In the regular season matchup, Jalen Walker had one of the most ridiculous games that you will ever see. Now, he is off in the NFL and playing for my Falcons, so it all worked out there. But at the end of the day, you have an incredible matchup. Gunnar Stockton leads them to the win last year in the SEC Championship in comeback fashion. At the end of the day, we can talk about all of that. It's Kirby Smart against Steve Sarkisian. It's a really fun matchup against 2 of the best minds in college football. It is going to be so much fun to watch this one go. And there's a number of ways to look at this game. There's a number of big-time matchups. There's so many impact players. There's a lot of different ways for this game to be looked at. Here's the reality. Whoever misses less tackles, they're going to win that football game. I feel very confident saying that because there's a CJ Vogel, if you don't know, does a great job covering Texas for On Texas Football. He released a stat earlier this week. Gunnar Stockton and Arch Manning are number 1 and 2 in the SEC in passes behind the line of scrimmage. Gunnar Stockton sitting around 30% of his passes behind the line of scrimmage. Arch Manning around 25%. They've tried to push the ball downfield with Arch Manning. I think that offensive line's made it a little bit tough for Texas, but both teams thrive off yards after catch. That's what they do. Zachariah Branch is the leader in the country in that statistic. I have to assume Ryan Wingo is making up that difference pretty quickly with the number of plays he's made after the catch the last couple of weeks. But at the end of the day, whichever defense can make less mistakes, can put the guy on the ground, cannot give up that big play, they're going to win this football game. I feel very confident saying that because I don't think either of these offenses are going to get away from that. I think that's who they are, and I don't think they're going to necessarily try to push the ball downfield all of a sudden because they have to make sure they get away from some of these linebackers. The reality is you're just going to have to make guys miss. You're going to have to make C.J. Allen miss if you're Ryan Wingo or DeAndre Moore on the outside. Anthony Hill is going to be flying down the hill at Zachariah Branch and all of these great receivers for Georgia. It is going to be a yards after the catch game. Whoever has more of those, I fully believe will win this football game. The other part of this that's very interesting, and I heard Brooks Austin, I believe, talking about this, does a great job covering Georgia and does a great job covering college football in general. He was breaking down the Texas offense, and over the last 6 quarters, I think it's very fair to say, it's looked like a really good unit. It looks like a unit that can be dangerous, that can be explosive, that can run the football better, maybe not at an elite level, but at least better. And I think the question is that just Arch Manning making all types of incredible plays? Because there's quite a few of them on tape, specifically in that Mississippi State game, just felt like everything was Arch Manning getting out of the pocket, making big-time plays, and I have to assume that's going to be part of the conversation here. Mainly, how good is the Texas offensive line? They did a good job against Vanderbilt. Was that schematic? Was that Arch Manning helping them out? Or was that genuinely them finding the right 5 guys, slotting them into the right positions, and them actually having a good unit? That'll be something to watch. Now, Georgia doesn't do a great job of getting in the backfield. They're one of the least havoc rate teams in the country. They have one of the, I believe, only 11 sacks on the year now. Had 2 last week, so maybe they're finding something there. But 11 sacks on the year is not normal for a Georgia team. I can tell you pretty confidently, if they don't get after Arch Manning in this game, if they don't push him off the spot, if they don't make him nervous, he's going to be able to dice you up. We've seen what he's been able to do with a little bit of time, and that hasn't been frequent this year, but at the end of the day, when he does get time, the kid's going to make the right play. He's a very talented player and absolutely is someone that if you don't force him to make bad plays, he's probably not going to make them all that often. Now, on the other side, I think this one, it's Gunnar Stockton. Just so steady, such a smart quarterback, a guy that I rarely have seen make the wrong play. Sometimes he'll put the ball in his pocket when he should let one rip. There's very few times when he puts the ball just in harm's way for just about no reason. So it's going to be a really fun one. These are 2 very high-level quarterbacks. I think they're playing as good of football as they played in their entire career, particularly Arch Manning. Gunnar Stockton's been doing this just about all year, but it's a special one. There's no doubt about that. 2 elite run defenses, and if Georgia can't run the ball, then this thing gets a little bit more interesting, and we have a big-time fight. I don't think either team is going to be able to run the ball very effectively. I'm very confident saying that about Texas. A little less confident saying that Georgia can't run it, but I tend to believe they won't be able to. it's going to come down to these two quarterbacks. I think both of them, if you're asking me over the last 2 weeks, I think these are top 5 quarterbacks in the sport. Now, Arch Manning started the season so poorly that he's still quite a far way down in the quarterback rankings overall, but the last couple of weeks, he has played really high-level football. I think Steve Sarkisian will have a better plan. I really do. I think he'll attack this team in a better way. I think he'll handle some of those 5-down fronts that totally ate up the run game for Texas the last couple of years. I think he'll do better there. At the end of the day, it's Kirby Smart. They're at home. It's a quarterback that I feel a little bit more confident in making that big-time play at those big-time moments. I'm going to take Georgia to win this one 24-20. I think that defense is just too good. I think Kirby Smart is just too smart. I think there's going to be a couple of moments where Arch Manning is pushed into a tough spot. Maybe he's leaving the pocket. Maybe it's just collapsing on him, and he makes one mistake. And that's the big-time difference in this football game. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be an absolute fight. I just trust the Georgia quarterback. I trust the Georgia coaches just that touch more than I trust the Texas guys, and that's going to be the difference in this one. I'm going to lead Georgia 24-20, but it's going to be a great matchup. It's a huge one where if Oklahoma and Texas win those 2 games, chaos in the SEC, especially if Vanderbilt wins out and goes 10-2. I don't know what you have at the end of the year. I don't know what it looks like. I'm going to pick it to go the other direction. I'm going to pick Alabama and Georgia to probably knock those 2 teams out of CFP contention, but you never know. All of that stuff is very much on the table, and we will obviously cover it as it unfolds. But I'll take Alabama, I'll take Georgia, I'll take Iowa to get a big-time win, and I'll take Notre Dame to knock off Pitt. But going to be a really, really fun weekend with 4 games that will have everything to do with what the CFP is. I mean, it's an elimination game for one of the 2 teams in just about every single one of those. So going to be awesome to watch that unfold. But let's take a break here. When we come back, we got upset alerts. I got 6 games here for you to break down. Some I'm not super worried about. Some I'm very worried about for the favorite, and we'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the big-time ranked matchups for this upcoming weekend. I got Notre Dame beating Pitt. Pat Narduzzi's quote did not fill me with a lot of confidence about the Panthers. Iowa, I think, wins a very gross, rainy matchup against USC. I think Alabama gets it done against Oklahoma. I just can't bet against Ty Simpson. And then I'll pick Georgia at home against Texas. I just think Kirby Smart's too good. If I'm being totally honest, that's what that one's coming down to. But upset alerts all over the place this upcoming weekend, and frankly, I've done this quite a few times, and I always put 6 games in here, try to get ones that I'm not super worried about, ones that I am super worried about, and I tend to always miss the one that actually happens. So be looking everywhere is kind of the big, the thing in college football that you always have to know is every time you look at one specific matchup and you really hone in on that one, tends to be the one that doesn't go crazy, and then one you're not paying attention to goes wild in the meantime. But at the end of the day, let's go ahead and jump into this one. South Carolina at number 3, Texas A&M. Texas A&M an 18.5-point favorite in this one. There's a couple of things at play here, and I'm really overall not super worried about this one. Maybe a 3 out of 10 on the upset meter, but there's a couple of things that could happen here. One, A&M is kind of in a really, really good spot. For the first time in a while, they have wiggle room, which is a crazy thing to be talking about Texas A&M and wiggle room, but they do. Does that create some type of complacency? And the other part of it is, I get it. Lenore Sellers has not had his best season. Lenore Sellers has played poor football in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure he would be the first person to tell you that. He's got a special performance in him. That's too good of an athlete. That's too good of a guy. That's too good of a football player to not have one of these performances in him. I'm not saying it's going to be against A&M. I'm not saying it's even going to happen this year. I'm just saying it is always in the cards for Lenore Sellers to go for 400 yards, run all over a defense, and go for 4 touchdowns, and that be the story of the game. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Cassius Howell and company are going to be getting after him very, very aggressively, and he has to be superhero to win this game. Don't make no 2 mistakes about it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a really interesting one. I think there's enough at play here to make it really interesting. I don't think A&M's losing this one. I think it could get in between that 18.5 and it could get below that 18.5, excuse me. But unless Lenore Sellers just puts on a cape and becomes the best player in college football once again, I don't think they're winning this one. I can't imagine South Carolina's got this one in the bag. Again, I'll put a 3 out of 10 on this one. Not super worried about it, but when you have that type of athlete on the other side at quarterback, things can always get a little bit interesting. NC State at Miami. Miami a 14.5 point favorite here. This one's interesting. Much like South Carolina A&M, Miami is the better team. Just point blank period. They're the more complete team. But CJ Bailey has that little bit of the thing where we saw it against Georgia Tech a couple of weeks ago. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to guard that dude. He's 6'6". He can run all over the football field. He's got a great arm. He's very talented. When he is playing confident and on time, he's a very, very tough guard. So that's the other reality. Can you find openings against this Miami defense? And then can you get CJ Bailey in a groove? Because if you can, this could become an interesting game in a hurry. The flip side of that is NC State is literally last in the FBS in pass yards given up per game. They're below 100th in every important passing stat. Carson Beck's got to have a field day, right? He's got to be able to bounce back from whatever funk he's been in the last couple of weeks and have a really, really great game. I think this one could be interesting. They go back and forth. If they can't, let's go hamper CJ Bailey early in that football game, it's going to be a long afternoon for that Miami defense. But at the end of the day, if they're going to let Miami do whatever they want through the air, and it seems like they're going to, I think Miami wins this one. I'll say a 5 out of 10. I really do think CJ Bailey's that special, and Miami in November is never a guarantee, but I'll say Miami's able to do enough in the pass game to win this one. Number 18, Michigan, minus 12.5, going to Northwestern this upcoming weekend. This one's going to be really, really fun. I believe this one's in Wrigley, if I'm not mistaken. Really interesting one going down here. I think so many Michigan fans and maybe Michigan players, at least hopefully for Northwestern's case, are kind of looking towards that Ohio State game. You know, when you think about it, they're in a position where they got to win out the rest of the way. Ohio State's really the only one, at least on paper, that should be a massive challenge for this football team. Do they not focus on the Wildcats? And I'll tell you, David Braun's doing a good job with that football team. Preston Stone's playing high-level football. Griffin Wilde has become one of the better wide receivers in the conference. It's been a very, very interesting year for Northwestern. They haven't quite had that signature win, and I think this could very well be the moment. Now, Michigan should be able to do just about whatever they want on the ground. Now, losing Justice Haynes is a big deal. I think Jordan Marshall is an incredible player and is going to be great for this team, but the explosives created by Justice Haynes are a massive piece of this offense, and that goes down just a tick. I mean, I think it would go down a tick going from Justice Haynes to just about any other running back in the country, so it's not overly surprising, but does change the kind of complexion of this game if Griffin Wilde can take over. I think that's the big thing. If Griffin Wilde, the wide receiver, can take over this game, things can get interesting in a hurry. I don't see that being the case. I like David Braun. I think this one could be very close. I think it will be very close, if I'm being totally honest. I see this being a 10 or 7 point game, but I think I'll say 6 out of 10 on the upset meter. I think Northwestern is live to get this one. I tend to believe they're going to fall a little bit short. Number 13, Utah, minus 8.5 at Baylor. This is a weird spot for Utah, and they're kind of in a weird spot just moving forward. They have the ability to win out and be in the conversation. I mean, they're sitting at 13 right now in the CFP rankings. They'd have to move up, I believe, 3 spots to get an at-large bid, and Texas and Oklahoma could lose this weekend. So there's a lot on the table for this football team moving forward. The question is, what happens to all the other teams around them? Teams that win behind them, teams that get big-time wins behind them, do they jump over Utah, or does Utah get to be able to bump up into this thing without having to play that big-time opponent? The other part of that is Utah's got to handle business, and they got tough games. They got Baylor and then the 2 Kansas teams. It is going to be difficult to finish out this season, and you have a Baylor team. You have Dave Aranda mainly that's just looking for anything. They're looking for something to make up for a relatively disappointing season. You lose that game in the opener to Auburn. You have one of the best pass offenses in the country and quarterbacks in the country with Sawyer Robertson, and you just can't stop anyone. And that's a huge problem for this Baylor football team. It's also been a problem for Utah as well. The run game for both these teams, or the run defense, I should say, for both these teams has just been downright terrible. And both of them, well, more Utah loves to run the football, but Baylor is more than happy to, with Bryson Washington and all the guys they can. Sawyer Robertson is more than capable of a runner. I think this is a wounded animal moment for Baylor. I think Dave Aranda is going to have his guys ready to roll. I tend to believe Utah gets it done. I think the running game is going to be enough of a difference to where they win this one. I think it's absolutely down to the wire. I'll put a 7 out of 10 in this one on the upset meter. Arizona at Cincinnati, number 25 Cincinnati right in the mix, -6.5. They get a huge one against BYU next week. Could this be a little bit of a look-ahead spot? And frankly, Arizona is probably becoming one of the more underappreciated teams in the entire country. They're 6-3 right now, and they battled with BYU. They battled with Houston earlier in the year. They got kind of rolled by Iowa State, but that's beside the point. Cincinnati, they're looking at a Big 12 title. That's what they want to get. They got to be able to win this game and then get a BYU win. Going to be very, very tough. But you got to handle this one first. There's no crazy advantage one way or the other on paper, but there's something really interesting about Arizona's pass defense. They've been really good this year. They've been able to stop a lot of really good teams or like really good passing offenses in. Brendan Sorsby, Cyrus Allen, and this passing offense for Cincinnati absolutely fits into that category. Now, they still have a guy like Tawee Walker that can make all types of plays on the ground. They are more than capable of running the football, but it's a very interesting game. I just don't think, I do think that Arizona has a very real shot to do some damage through the air in this football game. I think Cincinnati's going to have to kind of adjust their game plan just a little bit, maybe lean on Tawee Walker a little bit more aggressively in this game than you have in the past. I just think it's going to be really hard to get that win on the road. I think this one is very, very close. And frankly, I think Arizona might just win this game. But I'll say Cincinnati wins it. I think they might win it by 3. They might win it by 1. I think it's going to be a very close game, a little bit up and down with some of these offenses. But at the end of the day, I do think Cincinnati wins it. I'll put an 8 out of 10 on the upset meter. I think it's a very real possibility the Wildcats get a win here. And then TCU at number 12, BYU. BYU only a 4.5 point favorite, so as you can imagine, the upset meter is very, very high in this one. BYU's in a weird spot. They're just coming off a loss to Texas Tech. They're looking forward to a game against Cincinnati. And you got TCU just sitting there with another team that's had a disappointing season, has not gone the way that they wanted to. But Sonny Dykes can put together a really, really good game plan. And he can take advantages of defenses that in the past have looked absolutely great, which BYU absolutely has. There's an opening here to make something happen. Now, TCU, the big thing here is they're solid against the run, I should say. They're very solid against the run. BYU kind of has to run the football. I don't want to say has to. They were able to pass the football against Iowa State and get a win. But at the end of the day, everything starts with LJ Martin in that run game and Barrett Bachmeier in that run game. Maybe they're not able to do it as cleanly in this one. I think TCU has a huge chance here to maybe not salvage their season, but at least give a little bit of a silver lining at the end of this one that they probably feel like they left a lot of meat on the bone in. I think this is going to be interesting. I think TCU might win this football game. Kavarian Barnes, Trent Battle are very, very tough running backs to slow down. I think there's one where maybe the BYU run game doesn't get going. I'm going to put a 9 out of 10 on it. I think this one's going to be tough. I think TCU might just win this matchup. But going to be a really fun one. We will see how all of that unfolds, of course, and there's a number of others. In fact, we'll talk about a couple others in this next segment. Just felt like I wanted to spread this thing out a little bit more. So we definitely have a couple more that could go crazy. And then there's going to be a couple more. I promise you that. There's just one of those years where when I talk about upset alerts, I might as well just go through the entire slate and just see what happens because all of these games are going to be a little bit weird. All of these games are going to be a little bit off their rocker. But at the end of the day, we'll see if any of those upsets come to fruition. For right now, let's take a break and then let's get into just a little bit of a whip around. We got Clemson, Louisville, a very interesting one. Another upset alert there. We got a couple of huge ones in the American, a huge one in the ACC. And then we'll give a little bit of love to the D2 teams that are playing literally steps away from each other. We'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the upset alerts all around the country and we got 6 of them. There's plenty more and we're going to talk about a couple of them right here. We got a little bit of a whip around for you, a number of games that we just haven't quite gotten a chance to touch on that we got to do it right. Excuse me for that, apologies there. But let's go ahead and jump into this. And let's start. Clemson goes on the road to number 20 Louisville. Louisville favored by 2.5 in this game, over under at 49.5. It's a Friday nighter. Friday night at 7:30, going to be really, really fun. This line feels weird, right? Like Clemson's been a terrible season, a season from hell in a lot of ways for the Clemson Tigers. And now they got a Louisville team that, yes, did just come off a loss to Cal, a tough loss, but maybe they're more focused. Maybe they're locked in. They're a really tough team. I don't know. This one's giving me a couple of vibes that are very, very interesting. Absolutely a game that would totally shake up what the ACC looks like. Louisville could lose this one, be totally out of the ACC, and then they get a chance, I believe, at Virginia next week, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be really, really interesting. Or SMU. SMU is who they get next week, and then they could blow their season up. So this could get really interesting. It's going to be a fight. I think it's going to be an absolute battle. Clemson coming in with some confidence. Trey Moore playing really, really good football for them right now. I believe they're in a really good position. Louisville without Isaac Brown is a really interesting piece in this, where if Clemson can stop the run, that's probably the guy that could kind of defy that in some ways, defy some of the athletes that Clemson has. I'm not sure they have another guy that can do it to that level, I should say. So I think it's going to be a really, really incredible fight. I'll lean towards Louisville in this one, but I think Clemson's very, very live to win this football game. I think they got a little bit of confidence brewing in. If they can get the ball to all the playmakers they have on the out, TJ Moore, not Trey Moore, apologies for that. TJ Moore is playing really good football. If they can get it to guys like him and let them make plays, I think this one could be a whole lot more interesting than maybe some people think. Minnesota at number 8, Oregon. Oregon coming off that very, very weird win over Iowa in the rain, and they stare down a finish of Minnesota, USC, and Washington. None of those are layups. I can promise you that. This Minnesota team is very, very tough, but you are in the middle of these two games against Iowa and USC, two ranked matchups. Not to say Minnesota should be overlooked, but it's not crazy to think you might overlook this Golden Gophers team, but this is a very fun team. Drake Lindsey is very dangerous. Darius Taylor, one of the best running backs in the entire country, period. Very, very fun team up there for PJ Fleck, and they've given quite a few teams some scares this year, so they absolutely could shock this team. It's a pretty typical trap game for Oregon in the classical term. If you're going to get lost in one game, I think this might be the one that you do it. I like Oregon's size and physicality to win out overall in this one. I think Dante Moore is gaining a little bit of confidence after that win last week. I think they end up winning this one, but Minnesota might be a little bit more live here than 25.5 favored for Oregon would have you think. Number 24, South Florida at Navy, a huge one in the American, and there's another one we'll talk about here in a minute, but there's obviously a number of more weeks to go. There's still some things that could happen. I'd be willing to bet the winner of this game is going to be in the American title game in a month. I feel fairly confident saying that, and it's going to be a really interesting fight. Two very, very run-first teams, two teams that attack the run game in kind of different ways. Navy a little bit more, obviously, you get downhill with that fullback, or you pitch the ball all the way to the outside. USF kind of somewhere in the middle of that. They were a little bit of a wide zone football team with that quarterback run being a big piece of that. That's kind of what I want to zero in on here. Byron Brown and Ethan Horvath are about as good as you're going to find in Blake Horvath are about as good of quarterbacks as you're going to find at the Group of 5 level. They are going to make remarkable plays in this one. I promise you that. It is going to be well worth your time to tune into this one. Going to be very, very fun because Navy is one of those offenses that methodical. We're going to run the ball, and then they hit a 60-yard explosive when you did not expect it. Eli Heidenreich is a very, very dangerous player when he gets the ball in his hands, and I think it's going to be a really fun one. Overall, I trust South Florida's defense just that touch more than Navy's right now. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I think we could have a shootout on our hands. I also think this one could kind of get bogged down just a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a great one. I think South Florida does enough to win this one and keep their CFP hopes firmly alive. Number 19, Virginia at Duke. Duke favored by 5.5 in this one, over under at 57.5. It's a 3:30 kick over there in Durham, and weird one, but a massive one in the ACC. Duke is still alive for the ACC championship at 5-4. They have the ability to run the table the rest of the way, get into the ACC title, win it, and then we'll see what happens from there. But they got to get through Virginia first. Virginia coming off a tough loss last weekend to Wake Forest, where they lose Chandler Morris in that game. It sounds like they're hopeful he's going to be okay. We'll see what happens the rest of the week. Concussion protocol is a very, very fickle thing that you can be back in 1 week. It could take you multiple weeks. I tend to believe he will be out there on Saturday, but something to watch as we get a little bit closer. They're going to need him. I can promise you that. They need Chandler Morris to be on that football field because Dario Mensah is going to make plays in this game. He is too talented of a thrower of the football to not make a couple of big-time plays. He is going to do that. I think it's going to be a really, really fun game. I don't really have the same desire to see Duke blow this thing up the way that some other people do. Not to say it wouldn't be entertaining, not to say it would be or it's anything against Duke, if I'm being totally honest. It's just one of those things that I think would be so ridiculous to watch an 8-4 team find their way into the CFP. But who knows? Maybe it could happen. Frankly, I think they're going to tease us just a little bit longer with it. I think Duke wins this game. I think it's going to be a weird one to watch. I think it's going to be back and forth, up and down, but I think Dario Mensah and Duke win this one, and the idea gets a little bit more clear that maybe the ACC is not in a great spot for the CFP moving forward unless they somehow get an at-large from Miami. Again, we'll talk about it all on Friday. It gets very confusing every time we talk about it. Memphis at East Carolina, another huge one in the American, another one that could very well decide who plays in that conference championship game. Now, Tulane will have plenty to say about that, and we'll talk about the rest of the G5 games here in a second, but at the end of the day, really, really fun one. Memphis coming off a loss last week, didn't play all that strong of football throughout that football game. Kind of got blown out and were able to make it look a little bit better at the end there, but they're coming off a loss last week, and they go into a really, really tough team. Blake Harrell has done a great job since he's taken over that team. Caden Hauser is playing really high-level quarterback for them, and they're a really tough team. They play really good defense. They run the ball well, and then Caden Hauser makes very few mistakes. It's a very, very well-run team, and they're favored in this one. 2.5 points when you're at home makes sense to me. I think it shows that they're probably about even on a neutral field, maybe Memphis slightly favored, but Memphis is a great team. I think they're really, really solid. I think ECU is really good against the run. I think the Memphis pass offense is going to struggle, or pass defense, is going to struggle against Caden Hauser. I think ECU gets this win. I think they knock Memphis out of the race 2 weeks after they were in the CFP. I think they're going to be fully out of the race for the American. And then Florida at number 7, Ole Miss. I just wanted to talk about the storyline. Ole Miss favored by 15.5 here. I don't know who's starting at quarterback for Florida, whether it's DJ Lagway or Trammell Jones Jr. Both of them are talented kids. It would be interesting to see what Trammell Jones had. I don't know how much it matters. I'll be totally honest with you. There's tons of moments where this Florida team could have quit and they didn't in the past 2 years, really. I think they might have quit last week. And that's not trying to be disrespectful in any way. That's just I don't think Kentucky beats any team by 31 unless that team is not all the way there mentally. So that's going to be a weird thing to watch. I think Ole Miss wins this game. I think they kind of roll in this game. I think Trinidad Chambliss has a great day. The talk around Lane Kiffin is going to be very interesting because that Florida job is still sitting there. They are going to make that guy tell them no before they move on. I promise you that. It'll be interesting to watch this one unfold, especially in the build-up. I think Ole Miss is going to take care of business in this one. But frankly, if DJ Lagway gets out there and just has one of those afternoons, who knows? Absolutely a team that could make a big-time splash. We saw him do it again earlier this year against Texas. Could very well happen to Ole Miss here, and we'll see what happens if it does. But at the end of the day, that's more about Lane Kiffin in Florida, and we'll see what happens with that down the road. And then the rest of the group of 6 games, let's just get to these real quickly. App State JMU should be a game that JMU just kind of goes about their business, but those rivalry games can get a little bit weird. So that's one to watch pretty closely. Texas State against Southern Miss. Southern Miss playing really good football under Charles Huff. A lot of respect to him. Does a great job down there, and Marshall probably feeling not great about that decision. But at the end of the day, they face off against G.J. Kinney and Texas State, a really fun one down there. In the Sun Belt, yes, apologies. But yes, in the Sun Belt, FAU at Tulane. Tulane, again, should be able to handle this one pretty comfortably and continue moving forward in the American. Utah State, UNLV. UNLV still alive in the Mountain West. And then Boise State at San Diego State, the other massive one over there in the Mountain West that still technically in the mix for the CFP. I'd be surprised if the Mountain West champion was the representative. And then Kennesaw State playing great football. A really, really great job by Jerry Mack taking over in his first year. They're favored over Jacksonville State. That's a very interesting team as well. So we got a lot of fun ones. A lot of ones that are going around that are going to be really interesting. And at the end of the day, I think you're looking at the American or JMU for your CFP representative. But at the end of the day, with how the ACC's looking, everything's on the table for these teams moving forward. And before we get out of here, we got to talk about the Battle of the Ravine. Henderson State plays Ouachita Baptist. This is a weird game. It's not a game that's overly important. Both these teams are 7-3. They're D2 football teams. A lot of people won't talk about this game, and frankly, it just tickled my fancy. I really liked it. The Battle of the Ravine, if you need to know anything about it, both these schools are in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. These schools are literally across the street from each other, and that's not being hyperbolic. That's not me joking. That's not me being too aggressive. They're across the street from each other, so much so that the away team, which will be Henderson State in this one, they're going to be in their own locker room in pregame, and then they're just going to walk over to the field and play a football game. They're not going to take a bus. They're not going to do any of that. They're just going to walk from their locker room to the other team's field, and they're going to face off. It's the 98th time that these teams have met. They met the first time in 1895. Andrew Edwards, dual-threat quarterback for Henderson State, very talented kid. Trey Nichols leading the way for Ouachita Baptist. You got Chris Henley Jr. You got Jordan Walker as his running mates. It's just college football. It's the perfect encapsulation of what college football is about, because all of those kids I know are so amped up for this game. They're going to be so excited walking over after they get their cleats on. They're going to be walking across a street probably to get on the other field. It's just great. It would have been awesome to have College Game Day there. Frankly, I think they should be there. It's just such a perfect encapsulation of what college football is. It's on at Saturday at 2 p.m. So if you'd like to tune in, please do. It's going to be a very, very fun one, and a game that should get a little bit of love. In a world of college football that is meant to be weird, that is meant to be specific, that is meant not to be for everyone, why not give Henderson State, Ouachita Baptist, a little bit of love on Saturday? Because it's a great encapsulation of what college football is all about. But that's just one I wanted to throw in there. Felt like I had to give some love to the D2 ranks before we got out of here. But an incredible week of college football. A week of college football that will tell us a lot about what's going to go on in the CFP. But I'll take my whack on Friday. I'll try to figure out what's going to happen in all of these chaos scenarios around every conference. I'll do my best to break it down on Friday. I promise you that it's not going to be easy, but I'll do my best to break it down on Friday. We'll give my best bets on Friday, maybe some final thoughts, maybe some reactions from games that happened until Friday, We'll see how all of that develops, but a lot of stuff coming on Friday. We'll get into just the chaos scenarios that could totally change what this sport is about. But we'll talk about it all as it goes on, but thank you so much for tuning in to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment. It means the absolute world to me. Helps me out a ton. Something I want to build around here. Really special thing for people that love college football. That's what it's all about. So please do like, subscribe, comment. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on Friday to break down chaos is probably the best way to put it.